I had never, I still don't really plan to retire in what I imagine is the traditional sense. So it was never my intention to be working full time, suddenly to leave full time employment on Friday afternoon, and from Monday have nothing in the, nothing work wise in the calendar. So I'd always expected to have some sort of portfolio, and I'd set up to do that. So one of the things I did was, and I recognize that this was lucky and it isn't something necessarily that everybody can plan for, was that I worked for Lloyd's Register. They had a portfolio of different businesses. I was operating at group level, and they offered me the chair of one of the portfolio businesses to take over at the time I left. So that was my first non-executive position in place. And it was only, something I say 2 days a month. So it was only giving me 25 days a year, 25 days a year, compared with 250 days a year. So it was a small piece. But I think what's really important is to have that anchor, both from my mental perspective of being able to sort of say, I've achieved something, that I haven't time expired, which I think is important for people. I think that's really key. But also, I recognize that in order, particularly in the non-executive world, to get a role, you already have to have a role. And the breaking in is really hard. What most people find that they inevitably have to do is to take a pro bono role with a charity as a trustee in order to evidence that they can actually perform as a non-exec. And whilst I didn't decide in advance that that wasn't suitable, it was really helpful to have a fee-paying role already under my belt. So I took that as a fee-paying role, and I fairly shortly afterwards found that I got a second one. I had hoped to have a small number, 2, 3, no more than 4 non-exec roles, but also to do some advisory work. And in each of those places, on the non-exec roles and the advisory work, I wanted to do some things that were paid and some things that were pro bono. And I really didn't mind how it laid out. And I recognize that it's not possible to be too set in one's views as to what that looks like. You have to be, take advantage of serendipity, and be able to be responsive and flexible. So I had the traditional governance role under my belt. I was beginning to look for other things, and lo and behold, I got a contact as a result of somebody finding my profile on LinkedIn. And my profile on LinkedIn at that point in time didn't say anything about non-executive activity. What it said was quite a lot about governance and health and safety and quality and environment and risk and those sorts of governance-y related matters. And the organisation who was searching minded less that I didn't have any non-exec experience. But as I said, I hadn't even updated with the role that I had. And I learned something from that, which was that I've long bothered to keep my LinkedIn profile up to date, even at times when I wasn't looking for anything. And that proved to me that had been worthwhile, because that sort of background was established there, and people, this search organization, which was to do with a role for a company involved in interested in sustainability, basically was searching for sustainability and governance, and they didn't search for NED, even though it was a non-executive job, and as a result of which I got my second job, again paid. So at this point in time I'm doing nothing pro bono, and this particular role ended up with my chairing a board for a car manufacturing startup, which I think I probably mentioned to you previously, making hydrogen fuel cell cars, or hoping to, rather. So I then had 2, and at that point in time I thought it's about time that I start doing something pro bono. But then I ended up finding that somebody offered me a rather large consultancy assignment. When I say large, I mean it was 120 days a year for 3 years, so quite significant. And my ability to do anything else really, I was then nearly back to full time with 2 non-execs and the consultancy assignment, which was effectively an executive role for the Chartered Quality Institute. And what I did was I did a small amount of pro bono work with ISO, looking to help with the development of an international standard on corporate governance. And so that was something else I took. And at that point in time, I realized that I needed to be fairly careful that not everything time expired at the same point. You know, it's difficult to get these things going in the first place, but quite a lot of non-exec roles have a re-election at a 3-year point. Both of mine did. And I had a 3-year consultancy assignment, and I could see that it's sort of in 2018-19, I was going to end up with nothing again. So I was then looking for something else to sort of make sure that there was, if you like, every year something rolling off, something rolling in, and try to get a bit more regularity around it and to be a bit more planful in it. And I was lucky enough to be offered a role as a trustee for the Engineering Council, which was really helpful. And that again was on a 3-year periodicity, but it was a year later. And I've just been re-elected for a second time. And in fact, I was re-elected again for the car company. So that's gone on, and my consultancy assignment ceased. So I realized that something which I probably should have realized earlier, but seems to be very important for everyone considering life after traditional work, which is that non-exec roles increasingly require you to have a foot in the real world. And there was a time when you had a career, you came to the end of it, you became a non-executive director, you got your portfolio. More frequently now, I think that organizations are wanting to have people who are still working as non-execs, and a lot of organizations who are employing people full-time give them time to take a non-executive role as part of their career development. And that if you've basically got to the end of your shelf life and then take non-exec roles, at some point people want to know how it is that you keep current. And it's not enough to say, oh, I'm reading, or I'm attending conferences, or whatever it is that you do. And so around this time, 2018-19, I'm realizing that I'm running out of my nice 3-year consultancy assignment, and that my non-exec career is probably not going to be too healthy unless I do some more consultancy and keep my feet on the ground. And so consequently, with a colleague, I set up around that time a consultancy called Strategic Arrow, which I think I might have talked to you about, in order to provide that vehicle. And also in order to enable me to slightly be on a soapbox. I've always been quite self-opinionated, and with the views of the various things I was doing and my work with ISO, I thought that I had some views about corporate governance which were interesting. And so have been for the last two, probably nearly 3 years now, working in Strategic Arrow and basically doing some consultancy, whilst trying to still be able to have that opportunity to work as a consultant and do non-executive roles, rather than having to choose one or the other. Right now, if I talk until the beginning of, up to the end of 2020, I had been finding that I was working something like, 200 days a year, and had been throughout since I had retired, if you like. And for me, that was a really nice sweet spot, because I did want, when I stopped working full-time for one organization, want to have more time to do other things, but more personal things, not just work. And I saw that as being of the sort of thing as to being, I don't know, maybe a 2-week holiday every 3 months, every 2.5, 3 months. So taking 10 weeks holiday a year rather than 4 or 5. And I also wanted to do some other things, and I took up painting. So I've started doing watercolor botanical paintings. And I have been, until the back end of 2020, quite successful, I think, in being able to meld the non-exec, the consultancy, the art, and the travel. I've been very successful in that, and I feel I feel quite proud of the way that I've managed it. I know a lot of it was luck. I recognise that, but I have been out and about in order to make sure that that luck came my way. It's always been clear to the entirety of my network that I didn't intend to retire in what used to be the traditional way. And so I'd let a lot of people know that I was interested in opportunities, and without being very specific as to what they were, because people also recognise that my career has been a bit serendipitous, and I don't apologise for that. I quite like that, in taking advantage of and being open to whatever comes up. Getting the role at Lloyd's Register was very deliberate, and I did ask for that because I had seen this issue of 100 full-time, then nothing, and the difficulty of sort of restarting. So I knew that I couldn't leave without something under my belt. That was deliberate. The other things were less so, but I've always been I've always been I think a pretty good networker. I would always make a point of being out, say 2-3 evenings a week in London, catching up with people, going for coffees, without necessary full purpose, but being open to what might arise during the conversation, and usually finding that something did, not necessarily at that time, but at some point that discussion would have been worthwhile. And I also made a point of going to a number of meetups, either via Meetup or via I'm a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, and so I used to go to a number of their events, and I recognise that as a professional, I'm very mile wide, inch deep. So I've never chosen to be very specialist in any particular area. But what I think I'm good at is seeing the total landscape and appreciating how everything links together, and then knowing a number of mile deep, inch wide people. So I was worried, as I mentioned previously, about getting out of date and sort of becoming time expired. And so what I did was I deliberately went to meetups and events that were outside my comfort zone, in order that I could sort of be an inch deep on most things, and particularly a number of digital matters, a number of digital topics that I thought that people might feel that otherwise some mid-60s female might be really uncomfortable with. And I remember going to the RSA and going to a lecture about string theory, where I understood about the first 5 seconds. but it didn't stop me. I mean, I would do that frequently. And in fact, I met my business partner as a result of going to meetups. To meet up, or actually meet up, and then bumping into him there, and then bumping into in a few, another 1 or 2, and then finding that we had something in common, and recognizing that if you speak to quite a lot of people who are very adept in the digital world, then what they potentially aren't very adept at is governance, and recognizing that we're not going to be in a very good space if we allow a number of digital solutions to emerge without thinking about what are the consequences, and therefore what may need to be the controls around those. And I found that I was the only governance-y person talking to digital people in the events that I went to. And that for me then became a bit more purposeful. It didn't start off that way, but I saw that opportunity. And in fact, the business that Emmanuel and I have been developing has been around that interface between digital and governance, and trying to think about how you deal with that. There's something else that I did that I think was really was very good, and this was partly luck, which was, I mentioned the consultancy contract, the 120 days a year, etc., for the Chartered Quality Institute. One of the key things that they asked me to do was to establish a system of awards for quality professionals, which are now known as the International Quality Awards. One of the reasons the contract came to an end was because of COVID, because they didn't run it for a couple of years, but they are going to run it again in the future. And they asked me to establish that award system, which became not only for individuals, but also for organisations. And through that, and through seeing the entries and making the determination of what good and best practice looked like, enabled me to see organizations who were really being very successful, and to understand deeply what it was that they were doing to make them successful. As a consultant, organizations want you to bring best practice. And I was able to not only bring best practice from things that I had done myself, but from my privileged understanding about what other organizations had done. And I also sold that in relation to non-exec roles. So if you buy me, you're not just buying me with my background from Lloyd's, but you're buying the insight that I have pretty much exclusively been able to get. And so I know that that's not an opportunity that everybody will have, but I do think that one of the things that I focus on when I'm trying to get business, either as a non-exec or as a consultant, is to see where I might have some things that are unique, and to recognize those and to make them very explicit. And I've seen quite a lot of people who have retired, who are apologetic almost. It's, well, you know, I'm at this point in my career. What I'm bringing you is I've got time available because I'm not doing anything else, you know, and it's not very compelling. And I just think I sell better. I self-sell better, as to say that I'm unique, and I've had this privileged insight, and you won't get that from anyone else, but I will bring it to you. So I joined an organisation called the SEP Network of Women Chairs, which is still in existence, largely supports women who are doing pro bono, doing charitable roles, but not exclusively, but I think most of them are in that world. And that gave an opportunity to network with other women in the same circumstances. The network was supported by the consultancy firm Hayes McIntyre, who also then held meetings. There were lectures and places you could take issues, and I sought a mentor at that point. So I found another woman who with a lot of chair experience, and I asked whether she would mentor me, which she accepted to do. She offered to let me sit in her board meetings and watch her chair, and I talked through a number of issues with her. And that I think it was less a matter of learning specifics, because I'd read books and stuff, but it certainly helped, gave confidence, and to see the way that she dealt with questions and getting everyone to be involved, and etc. And of course I understood that the chair role is not just about what happens in the 3, 4, 5, 6 hours of the board meeting, which is I think what a lot of people imagine. It's largely what you do outside, and making sure that your board is suitable and that everybody understands how they can contribute, and that you know, have conversations with people who aren't, and etc. There's nothing you can't do if you choose to do it. And it's only yourself who holds you back. And I've seen so many, particularly women, who still think they can't, and who are waiting for somebody to give them an offer without really moving out of their chair and getting themselves in a position where they are, can be seen and therefore can be chosen.